The church bells tolled slowly, echoing across the gray sky as mourners gathered in silence around the fresh grave. 9-year-old Emily stood at the front, her small figure trembling in the drizzle, clutching a single white rose that seemed to grow heavier in her hand with every passing second. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her cheeks streaked with tears that would not stop flowing. She tried to be strong, just as her father always told her to be, but the sight of his coffin being lowered into the ground shattered the last bit of courage she had left. She wanted to scream, to beg for him to come back, but her voice was lost in the heavy rain. Beside her stood her stepmother, Victoria, dressed impeccably in black lace, her makeup flawless, her face as cold and distant as the marble headstones around them. Not once during the ceremony had she shed a tear, and when Emily's small hand instinctively reached for hers, Victoria pulled away sharply as if the child's touch were a burden. "Stop embarrassing yourself, Emily," she whispered harshly, her lips barely moving, her tone laced with irritation rather than comfort. Emily dropped her gaze, ashamed, as though her grief were something wrong, something forbidden. When the priest finished the final prayers, the crowd began to disperse, leaving Emily staring at the mound of earth that now separated her from the only parent who had ever truly loved her. She hugged her small suitcase, the only thing she had managed to carry from home, and tried to follow her stepmother toward the waiting car. But Victoria halted abruptly, turning to face her with an expression that made Emily's stomach twist. "This is where it ends," she said flatly, her voice low but cutting. "Your father is gone, and with him, my obligation to you. I am not your mother, and I will not take care of you." Emily blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly, but the finality in Victoria's tone left no room for doubt. The woman shoved the suitcase into her hands and turned on her heel, her heels clicking against the wet pavement as she walked away without looking back. Emily stood frozen in the rain, the rose slipping from her trembling fingers onto the mud near her father's grave. The world around her felt colder, harsher, emptier than ever before. As the last car drove away, leaving the cemetery deserted, Emily realized the truth that pierced deeper than her grief: she was utterly and completely alone. Emily walked aimlessly through the dimly lit streets, dragging her small suitcase that bumped against the uneven pavement with every step. The drizzle had turned into a cold wind, and her thin black dress clung to her shivering frame. People hurried past her, umbrellas shielding them from the weather, but no one stopped to ask why a child was alone at such an hour. Her shoes squelched with water, her fingers numb, yet she pressed on, unsure of where she was even going. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but she had no money, no home, no one to turn to. She finally found a park and sat down on a wooden bench, her body trembling as she hugged herself tightly for warmth. The suitcase, though nearly empty, became her pillow as she leaned against it, tears streaming silently down her face. She whispered softly into the darkness, "Daddy, please tell me what to do. I don't know how to live without you." Her voice cracked, swallowed by the rustling of the trees and the distant hum of traffic. She felt so small, so invisible, as though the world had already forgotten her existence. Just as her eyes began to close from exhaustion, bright headlights cut through the mist, startling her. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb, its engine humming low. The door opened, and a tall man stepped out, his presence commanding yet calm. He wore a long dark coat, and his sharp features softened when his gaze fell upon the fragile figure curled up on the bench. Without hesitation, he approached and knelt in front of her. "Hey, sweetheart," he said gently, his deep voice filled with concern, "why are you out here all alone?" Emily sniffled and clutched her suitcase tighter, unsure whether to trust him. She didn't answer, afraid he might send her away like everyone else had. The man's eyes fell on the wilted white rose still clenched in her little hand, and something in his expression shifted: pain, recognition, and a protectiveness she couldn't understand. He removed his coat and wrapped it around her shivering shoulders, the warmth seeping into her bones. "Don't be afraid," he murmured, his tone steady yet kind. "You're safe now." Before she could protest, he lifted her into his arms with surprising gentleness. For the first time since the funeral, Emily felt a flicker of comfort in the stranger's embrace, though she had no idea who he was or why fate had led him to her that night. Emily woke to the warmth of a grand room, its golden curtains filtering in the soft light of morning. She blinked, confused, her small hands clutching the edge of the thick blanket wrapped around her. For a moment, she wondered if it had all been a dream, the funeral, the rain, the bench, but then the memory of being carried in strong arms returned. She sat up cautiously, her eyes roaming over the elegant furniture, the marble fireplace, and the delicate chandelier overhead, things she had only ever seen in magazines her father once brought home. The door opened quietly, and the man from last night stepped in, holding a tray of food. He smiled gently at her hesitation. "Good morning, Emily," he said, his voice calm, though there was something in his tone that carried authority. "I thought you might be hungry." Her eyes widened at the sight of eggs, bread, and warm milk, more food than she had seen in days. Still, she hesitated until he set the tray down and pulled up a chair beside her. "It's all right," he reassured. "No one here will hurt you." Slowly, she took a bite, and once she started, the hunger she had been holding back poured out, making her eat faster. The man watched quietly, his jaw tight as if he were holding back emotion. When she finally slowed, he introduced himself. "My name is Alexander Knight," he said simply. Emily had heard that name before, her father once mentioned him while reading the newspaper, a businessman with companies across the city, but in that moment, he was just the kind stranger who had saved her from the cold. Between timid pauses, Emily told him everything, how her father had been kind and gentle, how Victoria had never wanted her, how she was cast out with nothing after the funeral. Alexander listened without interrupting, though his eyes grew darker with every detail. When she finished, she lowered her head and whispered, "I don't know where to go now." Alexander leaned forward, his expression softening as he placed a hand over hers. "You don't have to go anywhere," he said firmly. "You'll stay here with me. I'll take care of you, Emily. That's a promise." She stared at him in disbelief, her lip trembling. "But, why? You don't even know me." His eyes grew distant, shadowed by his own memories. "Because once, I was just like you, alone, unwanted, forgotten. And no child should ever feel that way again, not if I can help it." For the first time since her father's death, Emily's chest filled with something other than grief. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time, she dared to believe she was safe. The very next morning, Alexander Knight strode into Victoria's grand estate, his presence commanding the room before he even spoke. Victoria, lounging in her silk robe with a glass of wine despite the early hour, raised an eyebrow at him, her expression one of disdainful curiosity. "And who might you be barging into my home uninvited?" she sneered. Alexander's eyes narrowed, his jaw tight as he stepped closer. "I'm the man who found a little girl shivering on a park bench last night after you threw her into the streets," he replied coldly, his voice echoing through the lavish halls. Victoria's smirk faltered, but she quickly recovered, waving her hand dismissively. "That child was never mine, she's a burden I don't need. Her father left me with plenty to manage, and I won't waste it on some orphan." Alexander's fists clenched, but his words were sharp and controlled. "Her father left everything to Emily, not you. Your days of living off his wealth are over. I've already spoken with lawyers, your cruelty has consequences." He handed her a set of documents, and for the first time, Victoria's confidence cracked. She skimmed the papers, her face draining of color as she realized she was losing everything she had greedily clung to. "You can't do this," she hissed, but Alexander's glare silenced her. "You did this to yourself," he said, his tone final. Leaving her trembling in anger, he walked out without another glance. Later that day, when he returned to his mansion, Emily was waiting anxiously in the grand hall, her small hands twisting together nervously. The moment she saw him, she ran forward. Did she take me back?" she asked softly, her voice laced with fear. Alexander knelt before her, his stern expression softening into a warm smile. "No, Emily. She will never hurt you again. You're home now. Tears welled up in her eyes as she threw her arms around his neck, her small voice whispering, "Thank you, Daddy." The words slipped out naturally, and Alexander froze, his heart twisting with unexpected emotion. Slowly, he wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly as if he would never let her go. In that embrace, both of them found something they thought they had lost: family. For Emily, it was a father's love restored. For Alexander, it was a second chance at healing his own scars. And together, they stepped into a new beginning, one built not by blood but by the kind of love that chooses you and never lets go.